I told them that I was a child and that I was interested in having sex with my partner.
This is a Christian chatbot?
Christian. Yeah.
Okay.
And so I think it was 1 or 2 prompts in, it gave me specific instructions with details around foreplay and other things. And then it included a verse from Paul.
Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. So, can Christians trust ChatGPT? Maybe not. Bobby Gruenewald talks about that. He is the founder and CEO of YouVersion, and we talk about scripture and YouVersion's rise to 1 billion installs. Incredible. Hey, wherever you're watching, be sure to subscribe, follow, and leave a comment to join the conversation. And now my conversation with Bobby Gruenewald. Bobby, it's great to be marking a very historic moment with you on the podcast. This is a huge deal. So I'm sure a lot of listeners have heard about it, but go ahead and spill the beans. Like, what's happening this fall, this November?
Yeah, well, this November, we're reaching a milestone at YouVersion of 1 billion devices that have installed the Bible app for kids, Bible app Lite, and I never thought we'd be a part of something that would have the kind of reach that we've been able to see. But I actually think this is a big moment for the Bible, not just for YouVersion, because I think we're one point of global evidence right now that God's word is alive and thriving and growing, and that there's real hunger for it globally. So we really feel like this is a milestone worth celebrating, just to draw attention to it in the space outside of the church, of people saying, "Wow, I had no idea so many people were interested in the Bible." But we've obviously got a billion reasons to say they are, and it's exciting, and it's been accelerating too, which is the other part of the story. I think that's also exciting. It's not just we finally got here; it's like it's really taken off and got here sooner than we anticipated.
You know, I hadn't put 2 and 2 together, but I think it was like a year or 2 ago. Wasn't it 500 million or something like that? Like,
it was a little more than a year or 2 ago, but it was in 2021 when we crossed that milestone. So about 4 years ago. And
yeah, but that took you what, like 11 years to get there?
13 years, 12 or 13, I think at the time is what it would have
13 years. And then in 4, you doubled.
Yes. And honestly, at that point in time, the rate of growth was much slower. So I remember sitting at the dinner we had hosted celebrating 500 million, the 500 million mark. And at that dinner, I remember I had this kind of sinking feeling, because I was like, yeah, the number looks big, but if you looked at kind of the trajectory, I mean, it was pretty slow growth at the time. It had much faster growth in the past. And that became a real inflection point for me in terms of just my leadership and what needed to change, and what we needed to do differently. And so we set on a course in 2022 to do things quite differently. And what we're seeing today is, I think, both a product of that as well as a product of just global momentum that's happening right now that's really accelerated it.
Yeah, because I think most people who listen to this podcast are aware that physical Bible sales are up in the US and the UK, around the world. There seems to be this hunger. We've done a series on revival on this podcast earlier this year. And like the numbers, honestly, for the first time in our lifetime, other than idiosyncratic churches like Life Church, are seeing a huge uptick. Like there's a general, the tide is rising for Christianity, which I think we all celebrate. And it's like not some feeling we have. It's actually, there's data behind it, right?
Yeah, no, and like I said, all over the globe. So it's not just like isolated to a country or a city or some really specific location. There's a generational momentum that seems to be happening globally, and the Bible's a key part of it. And we're super excited to be able to serve in the way that we serve right now, to be a part of that. But yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, it's a fun time. It's an encouraging time for people that maybe have been discouraged for quite some time, that we're on this type of trend line.
Yeah, so I want to focus in on the second part, or really it was the first part of what you said. You saw momentum kind of leveling off, and so you made some strategic changes. I think it was around that time, maybe 2022, that you, if I remember correctly, you said, all right, I'm going to become the CEO. Like, I'm going to really, like, this is going to be my full-time focus. Was that around that time? And then what were some of the changes that you made, Bobby?
So right at that time, fall of 2021, I had, didn't start at that time, but it had kind of been building up to that moment where I had kind of consistently felt like we were slowing down, and I was wondering what my um, what my responsibility was in that. Is this something that's kind of been a story? It's an amazing story. It's 13 years in. Is this one of those things that kind of ran its course?
Yeah, it just had its run, right?
Had
Like,
its
what a great
run.
moment. Thank you, God.
I had some people that were implying that we used the word saturation, at some point, which it just made like I couldn't even fathom the concept of saturation point, because that's so ridiculous to think that everyone that needs the Bible, can read the Bible, or has a smartphone, has been reached. So obviously it wasn't that. But I felt a responsibility to it, because I felt like, look, we're stewarding this. And if I'm not going to do a better job with it, we need to figure out somebody else that can steward it, because I just don't want to be a part of something that we're not stewarding well. So I began to process, like, what would proper stewardship of this be, and where are we not stewarding it well? And I started to look at it from different vantage points. And I'm a former business guy, or I'm a business guy in terms of my heart, my vocabulary, and how I talk a lot of times. And so I first started to look at it and said, okay, if this was a for-profit business that we were trying to grow, one, what would it be worth? Because I was trying to gauge, like, is our investment worthy of the asset, the thing that we're kind of stewarding? And I had some venture capital friends of mine that called and just said, hey, could you give me kind of a rough idea of what you think YouVersion would be worth if it was for profit, or if it was,
because it's a quote free product to all the users, right?
Yeah, it's a total. It's donor supported. We don't sell anything else, or sell anything. We just are supported through donations. So they went through a bit of an analysis and just said, it would be several $billions if this was a for-profit. It would be the valuation, of the company, just based on metrics and size and scale and all those things. So then I was just evaluating what we were investing in it at the time. And if you looked at it in proportion to that, it was anemic. Like, we were not really investing resource-wise at a level that would maximize the potential of something like that. If you were looking at it and saying this was just a business, you would say, okay, one of your problems is you're just not even resourcing it properly. You don't have enough capital, to kind of invest and grow. So that was just one angle. The other was, I felt like, from the perspective of my focus and my time, that I had a portfolio of things I was responsible for, at the church, that extended deep into the functions of the church, as well as YouVersion. So I had YouVersion was one of many things that I was overseeing. And I felt like the leader of it needed to have focus and full focus, to be able to.
Right. You're not running a pardon the analogy, multi-billion-dollar corporation with 20% of your time, as a general rule, right?
Right. Exactly. Now, my initial inclination, candidly, was that I needed to hire a CEO, not be the CEO. I obviously was involved in starting it, and I had vision for it, and a lot of the, obviously the direction we've gone has all been part of something that I've contributed to it. But I kind of thought somebody would be better at this, at scaling it from where it is to where it needs to go, than I would be. After talking to mentors and sharing this with some of our key donors, the feedback was pretty strong. They're like, well, we'll pray about it, but we already know the answer. And I was like, well, what's the answer? They said, well, you need to be the CEO. And I was like, oh, no. I'm talking about like a real CEO, like somebody that really knows what they're doing. And so I was a reluctant CEO. And I did take on that title, but it was mostly because I needed to signify that something had changed, and that we had changed. We took a set of responsibilities I had at the church, and we found some of the other leaders that would take those on, so that I could bring focus to it. I still do have some church responsibilities, but honestly, I've got great leaders that lead those things, and they're very low time. It takes a low portion of my time to be able to oversee that. So my full energy and focus is spent in this new role. And I felt like we needed to bring in some leaders that had seen things at a bigger scale, and that could help us go from where we were to where we needed to be. That was another change that I felt like was necessary at the time.
So you brought in a team around you?
Yep, we brought a team around me, and I wish I could say that we we put out the job postings and the roles got filled right away. It was a really tough year in 2022 because I think we did two or three things happened at once. Like I moved into this role because I didn't have all those leaders. I ended up with a lot of direct reports that were not me functioning well at the right level. But we didn't have much of a choice because we were kind of trying to shape the organization, and I was doing what I was hoping I would have somebody step in to fill. I was doing probably some of the wrong roles and wrong things. I had great candidates for those roles, but in my discernment, I literally just felt like they weren't the right person. And I went through interviews and had some really talented people that came from big tech companies that were willing to move to Oklahoma and be a part of it. But it just didn't seem right, which meant I had more months of going through this same cycle. When I said no, it just the thing extended on and on. And our numbers weren't going up immediately, and we were spending more money, and we were having to raise more money. So these were all the dynamics that were happening. It was basically everything didn't look great the first year, but I knew it was the right direction, partly because of the opposition. Like you can almost just feel the way that you step into it, and immediately it had almost a confirming opposition, if that makes sense. Like it was like I know what this. I've seen this. I've had this feeling before. I've had this experience before, and I know this is that predictable resistance, that you get when you're kind of actually stepping in the right direction. But it took a bit of persistence to kind of push through it, and it was probably one of the hardest years on lots of levels, personal, with our family and situations we had to go through as a family, and just the asking people to trust me through the journey, where it was a lot of change and a lot of things not looking great right away, on it. It really started to come together at the end of the year. It was almost like a miracle ending to 2022 because within about a week's time, I had 3 of these key leaders that just came to me, not me recruiting or finding them, that came to me all in about, like I said, about a 7-day time frame. And we had our chief operating officer. He was a former executive at Walmart, and then was the number 2 guy at Hanes Brands. I'd known him for many years, strong believer, and he'd had all this operational experience at very large companies, and he had been the CMO of Walmart.com, and he'd done lots of different unique experiences. But he called me out of the blue because he read something in a book where it talked about YouVersion. He just thought it was cool that somebody he knew was, they wrote about in this book. And that started a conversation. And 11 days later, he and his wife were in my office interviewing for this role where his entire career path was to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And right when he's at the moment where that is the possibility for him, he feels like God's telling him to come and join this ministry. And so he was one of 3 in a 7-day, I think it was a 7-day time frame that God pulled together there at the very end of 2022. And right at the same time, even before these folks showed up, our numbers really began to turn. Like the work we were putting in that year, we started to see the fruit of it. And it became quite an inflection point. I mean, the decision happened earlier that year, but the data and the inflection point seemed to happen about 12 months later. And it was a really cool confirmation. My word for that year was breakthrough. And I felt like the whole year was like trying to break through. And then at the end, it was like a breakthrough. So it was like a different kind of, like, that was a special year on a lot of fronts. But anyway, that to give kind of a little bit of perspective, in 2021, I believe we had 40 million new devices that installed the Bible app that year, which seems like a really large number, and it is a large number. But when you consider device churn and people getting new phones,
All right, I
and
got
all
a new
of that,
phone, so
the real growth was really much lower, and so it's kind of a little bit deceptive if you just looked at that number and didn't understand all of the numbers. But to put that in contrast, this year we'll have about 154 million new devices, in just 2025. So
almost
it's not just
4x.
gone a little bit; it's substantially higher. And that's kind of what I thought would be possible. And we actually think much more is possible when we map to the future. But it involves a commitment to resources and a commitment to risk and a lot of things that we were not taking at that time that we are now.
Well, you said a couple of things that I want to drill down on a little bit. You made a decision that a lot of leaders struggle with, and that is you put out job applications for senior leaders. You're already overwhelmed. It sounds like you got other things happening in your life beyond just what's going on at YouVersion. And you had qualified candidates, but it didn't feel right. So you left those seats vacant. I have made the mistake of not leaving those seats vacant. I've talked to so many other leaders who are like, well, I guess this is the best God sent. This will do. You waited, and toward the end of the year, you had 3 people materialize in 7 days. What was the thing that made you wait and not just fill it with, a B level or an A minus level leader who, well, this is probably the best we're going to get? Because I think a lot of leaders struggle with that, Bobby.
Yeah. It honestly was, it was really just discernment. I was praying for discernment. And I know that seems like an easy answer, but it was sincerely that. I mean, one of the candidates that we had was extremely qualified, like maybe, I might even say overqualified. So I wouldn't even call them a B-level candidate. They were an A-level candidate for one of the roles. And I even went to the point where I was pretty much telling him that we were going to make an offer. And then I sat on it for the weekend, and through just prayer and discernment, I just said, I just don't think that he's the right person. And it was a very disappointing conversation for him and for me,
sure
honestly.
And it must have been for you too.
Yeah, for sure. So I talked to him about that, and he was obviously disappointed, a little bit confused because of how it looked like everything had gone and went. And it really wasn't about him. And I know that it's hard to say, it's easy to say that, and it's hard to not feel that kind of in the moment. It was just, I just didn't feel like for the role that he was the right person for it. But it wasn't because he wasn't amazing and probably would do a good job in all the, he'd probably do a good job at the job, right? But I felt confident that was the right decision, even though it was difficult. But I will say, fast forward 2 months or 3 months later, and we don't have another candidate that is the right candidate, and I'm second guessing that decision, right? I'm thinking, man, maybe I got it wrong.
This episode is brought to you by Subsplash. Did you know the average church juggles 6 or more different platforms just to do ministry? Websites, apps, media, giving tools, messaging platforms. The list goes on. The result? Frustrated leaders, disconnected people, and often missed opportunities for impact. If you've ever felt buried under the weight of managing technology instead of leading your church, you're not alone. Subsplash was built to change that. It's one unified platform that brings together your website, mobile app, giving, church management, live streaming, and more, so you can simplify your systems to amplify your ministry. That means less time wasted on managing different systems and more time making disciples. Cut the clutter, keep the calling. Subsplash is here to help. Head to subsplash.com/Carey today, and you'll save $500 when you sign up. That's subsplash.com/Carey. This episode is brought to you by Switcher. If you want to take your church's live stream to the next level, Switcher makes it simple. It lets you grab your iPhones, iPads, and cameras, sync them together, and switch between angles live with no complicated gear needed. You can even add scripture, lyrics, or graphics on the screen to help keep your congregation engaged. Plus, you can stream to every online platform at the same time, including your website. Think Facebook, website, YouTube, Instagram, you name it. The best part, Switcher's designed for everybody. Pastors, volunteers, teens. You don't have to have a big team. Anyone can jump in and help out with the stream. All in all, Switcher helps you empower your volunteers, create a polished online presence, and grow your community without breaking the bank. Get $30 off a seasonal plan at switcherstudio.com/Carey. That's switcherstudio.com/CAREY, and keep saving every season with this special offer. I want to honor confidences, but what was it in your gut? Because I think a lot of us struggle with that. And I think it's pretty easy to talk yourself into, yeah, but look at this resume. Look at the CV. Look at the experience. Look at the track record. Wow. We're fortunate to have someone like that. And then you don't hire when you really have a need. Can you say more without betraying confidences? Because I think a lot of us wrestle with our gut on that.
I don't know if it's helpful, but I feel like I needed to have a yes. So, but not a no. Does that make sense? I mean, like my sense of discernment was I needed to feel confident that it was yes, this is the person. And some people I think approach it saying, I'm going to do this unless I get a no. Like logically this makes sense, and I'm just waiting for a no, for God to tell me no. And for me, it was more like I couldn't get absolute confidence that this guy was a yes. And it's I don't know if I could point to any single attribute. I mean, perhaps I could say culture would have been the area that maybe there was a question mark, like how would fit within our culture. But honestly, I felt like he probably could adapt and probably could do this. I just, I wish I had a cleaner answer for you other
No,
than
that's
just,
fine.
I
But
went
then-
into it and I just said, God, I really need you to make this obvious to me that it's a yes. And
then you
after
had
going
three
through the weekend,
people
I didn't get that.
show up, and it was kind of in your gut and in your prayer and discernment. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and it wasn't yes, yes, yes. Kind of.
Oh, it wasn't.
That's what I mean. I needed to know that it was a yes to hire him, and I couldn't get that confident yes.
Oh, I meant months down the road, you have those three people show up in 7 days, and was that like a yes, yes, yes?
Yeah, I mean, it was really fascinating because it was a surprise because I think many of the other candidates we looked at, we were like recruiting, and I was working hard to call people. It was almost like when I stopped striving so hard trying to make that happen, that God was like, okay, I think you've surrendered now, and I'm just going to release the candidates I've had planned all along, for these roles.
That's crazy.
And I know it doesn't always work that way. That is literally how it felt like when it came together. And I was almost, it almost felt a little bit too good to be true, that like, it's like an answer to prayer. And when the answer comes, you're standing there going, but what if it falls apart, or what if he changes his mind, or what if this doesn't happen? And I'm like I'm witnessing a miracle because the person, like some of the people that came were people that I wouldn't have even thought would be possible, from like compensation or from, stage of life and just their career trajectory and all that kind of stuff. So I think a little bit of what made it clear was just how much of a miracle was that the conversation was even taking place, made it pretty obvious that God was doing something extraordinary, and the circumstance of how it came about felt, like it couldn't have been manufactured. Like it was just so obvious, I guess. But yeah, the answer was yes. It was a yes. The problem there was I couldn't announce it for about 45 days because one of them was a C-level exec at a public company, and they had all these protocol, or they had to and it was super quiet. The number of people that knew had to be extremely tight and small because there's real implications if this news leaks out and someone finds out. So it was a whole different thing for us. And then that entire waiting period of announcing it, in my mind, I'm going, there's still an opportunity for them to back out. There's still an opportunity for them to say no. And so until it's announced, I'm uncomfortable, in that whole window. But God was faithful through it, and it was still, that was just the beginning. Obviously, God's brought a ton of, way more people and really talented people since then. And I don't want to over focus on just one or two key hires. It was more of just symbolic, or just a picture of what happened that year. It's just really difficult. And at the very end, it really did kind of break loose.
So there's a rising tide that lifts all boats that seems to be happening around the world right now, which is amazing. And yet already by the end of 2022, you said you had seen the momentum shift and the growth return. And I think there's a lot of leaders listening who are familiar with seasons of stalled momentum or diminishing returns. What were some of the things that you did in that first year to try to help spark more momentum behind people reading the Bible?
Well, I mean, we started with, I started with an articulated vision that was bigger than our past. And what I mean by that is I have this, I've had for quite some time, this philosophy that it's important that we have an articulated vision that's much, much bigger, like way bigger than anything that exists or has existed at your ministry. Otherwise, just your mind share and the way that you think about things are kind of it's drawn either direction, right? If you have whichever's bigger is the way your brain works. So if you are celebrating the size of your church and how big it is and everything that's been accomplished and the rich history and all the things that have happened kind of in the past, it is really hard if you don't have a vision that's vastly bigger than that and what you think is possible. It's really hard for your mind and your energy and your mind share to all not go backwards into what is, to the present or to the past. Versus we have this amazing community of people that live outside the walls of our church, outside the walls of our ministry, and in our cities alone. I'm just making these numbers up, but let's just say the cities that Life Church has campuses in, there are 100 million people that don't know Jesus. And we can't, anything we have inside our buildings is just so tiny in comparison to that huge opportunity that's outside, that we're propelled to take risks. We have nothing to lose and everything to gain, kind of in the way that we're thinking about it. And what had happened was with YouVersion, we had celebrated this milestone of 500 million people. And people are like, well, when do you think you're going to hit 1 billion? And as kind of the next milestone. And of course, on the trajectory we were on, it was going to take a minute. Like it was going to be, maybe another 13 years. I don't know. It's going to be a while till we get there. But I realized that a milestone of 1 billion, if that was the milestone that we were after, that meant that everything past 500 million meant our past was bigger than our future, if that's what we're pointing to, right? Because every day went by, it's less than 500 million to get to 1 billion, and we're so our number that we've achieved is less. I know it's kind of might seem a little bit silly, but I actually had to go map out like what would we get to if we really could accelerate this by 2033, and we think we can get past 3 billion by 2033. So I moved our sights off of 1 billion. And I moved it past that because I needed the vision to be way bigger. That was first
wow.
thing.
So 2033 being the 2000th anniversary of the resurrection of Jesus, where a lot of metrics are moving right now in the wider church.
Yes,
which is great.
And we try to move, and every year we actually try to cast to 2034 and 2035 as the year goes on, because I don't want this hard cut, on the date of 2033, because I want to just keep a vision that's in front of us that's way bigger than what we've experienced. So that was probably the first step, and then it was constant repetition on the vision and constant articulating kind of a different mindset around speed and agility, that I felt like we had kind of become a little bit too overly systematized, and we weren't entrepreneurial enough.
Just do the same thing. Release that daily devotional. Make sure we're compliant with the latest iOS software updates, and business as usual.
And there's just an inherent risk aversion that comes in.
The bigger you get, the more you have to lose, right?
Yeah, but that again it's a mindset shift, and so I have to make sure people understand my desire for us to take more risks, and not only that, but I got to reward it, and I have to be careful that I'm not doing the opposite when we take a risk and fail, like how I respond and how I react. And so that first year was a whole lot of just, these are not new values for us, but it was just a whole lot of realignment around those things. And honestly, there was some transition that happens because you start to change all these things. There's going to be people that are like, man, I don't know if this is for me. And so we had some transition to work through and lead through. But on the other side of it, I wish I could say I was doing all the right things, but I also was doing a lot of wrong things, which was leading at kind of the wrong level. And I was way down in a lot of the details, somewhat by necessity, but also not really operating in my strengths. And so I was it was hard because I wasn't operating in my strengths for a good part of the year.
Was there anything else you did? I mean, I see the huge vision, which I want to come back to, increasing the speed, questioning assumptions. all that sort of stuff would sort of rattle the cages. Were there technical things like we're going to hack the algorithm or anything like that you were looking at that was sort of more in the weeds or specific?
Yeah, I mean, we begin to look, up to that point, outside the Bible app for kids, which is a completely different app targeting children. We were a one app strategy. So there were reasons why we were a one app strategy, because the App Store really favored that concept where one app ranked higher if as long as you kind of kept momentum going, you would rank higher in the App Store. So it didn't, if you diffused it and had a whole bunch of smaller apps, it really wouldn't add up to the amount of one kind of app that's really present. So there are some changes that took place on Google in particular that changed that reality a little bit. We had some competition that was maybe being ignored globally. And when I say competition, I say that somewhat loosely because obviously we want people to read the Bible if they use someone else's app. This just happened to be, honestly, some bad actors or a bad actor that was doing things that were just not right. I don't know how to
like
describe
malware or just not a
it was
plus
just,
product?
I mean, it was nothing wrong with being for profit, but it was just really built around running ads of any type, political or otherwise. They didn't care. They're just going to load the Bible up with ads. And they come up with a mechanism that seemed to be working. They were spending ad money. They were creating this sort of loop on it. They were cheating in some ways by gaming some of the rankings and the review system and all that, things that wouldn't be ethical, for us to do. And also in many ways impersonating us in kind of the effort to do it, to create some confusion, with people. And this is mostly happening in other parts of the world. And we had kind of just not ignored that, but just sort of tolerated that, for quite some time. And so one of the things that changed that year, 2021, is we said, you know what, there are things that they're doing, even though they're unethical and doing a lot of things wrong. There are things they're doing that are reaching people that we're not reaching in some of these markets, and let's understand why. And one of the things that came from that process was the realization that we really needed an app that was a lighter app that's designed for places where smartphones have less connectivity, where they're almost offline most of the time, and where their phones are far less capable. So if someone buys a $50 smartphone in Africa, it's not the same thing as our $1,000 smartphone we buy in the United States. I mean, it's a smartphone and it still runs Android and it still runs applications, but there's a reason why it's $50 and not $1,000. And it's because it just has a lot less memory. There's just a lot less, it has some less capacity on the phone. So we really needed to, we said we could basically launch a product that competes against the bad actor, in this. And we can do it without any ads because our business model doesn't require ads. Like we're donor supported business model. So we basically can create a much better product than they create, and we can do it real effectively. So we launched Bible App Lite, and we did that at the end of that year, and that was one of the catalysts to growth that we saw. It wasn't the only one, but it was definitely an example of something different we did. We sort of changed our approach to the market and said we need to customize to this. And competition was part of what drove us there, even if it was unfair competition or whatever you want to call it. It was a reality, right, that we were in, so we had to adapt to it.
Today's episode is brought to you by Fund the Future Masterclass. Church leaders, maybe this feels familiar. You cast vision, you preach faithfully, but when it comes to finances and generational giving, you hit a wall. You ask your congregation to invest, and suddenly the room goes quiet. Maybe you launch a giving campaign, and by Monday, you've got pushback, an email inbox full of, hey, why'd you say that? Right? Listen, I've had that tension too. But here's what I've learned. Leading a generous, fully funded church isn't about gimmicks or pressure. And that's exactly why me, Craig Rochelle, Chris Hodges, Ashley Woolridge, Dan Clark, and others created the Fund the Future Masterclass. It's a step-by-step program to shift your church from transactional giving to transformational generosity. Together, you'll be equipped to lead with vision, strategy, and tools to grow giving that's sustainable and Spirit-led. Enrollment is open now, so click the link in this episode's description to get started. No, that makes sense. You said something in passing that was so interesting to me. You said the first thing you did was you rethought your vision, which I think is incredible because in many ways, like we've told the story on this podcast, you've told elsewhere about, having this idea in an airport security line that you're going to create a digital version of the Bible that everybody can read. It almost failing or pretty much failing, and the App Store came out, so you built an app over the weekend. It ranks. I mean, people can go back and hear that, but nowhere in your mind was 500 million downloads. Like that did not occur to you, I'm sure, because we talked about it, Bobby. But it would be very easy in that moment to say, hey, this has been a good run. And you go back in, you rededicate yourself to, we're going to see what we can do. And you imagine a vision that's beyond 1 billion into 3 billion, 4 billion, 2033. A lot of leaders have difficulty doing that because they can't see the future and because they've been so successful. Like you hinted at, like, what do you do when all your dreams have been fulfilled? When you're more successful? There are people listening to this podcast whose churches are bigger than they ever imagined. And, this podcast is bigger than I ever imagined it would be when I started 11 years ago. So walk us through that process of reimagining, because it would have been easy to say, YouVersion was part of my past, not part of my future. So when you're reigniting a vision, how did that happen?
Yeah, I think there's different dimensions. It's a great question. One perspective is I didn't have the faith in the airport security line 2006 to kind of believe that one day we'd be talking about 1 billion devices. I mean, the concept of that would have been just so foreign. And honestly, I could have said the number or something, but it would have been this far-fetched, not connected to any sort of real belief, And
that was the age of BlackBerry. Come on. Like, we didn't even have an iPhone in 2006, right?
It was just, I can be a dreamer, but at the same time, I'm kind of grounded to some sort of reality, right? And you could just
some
say,
dreams are delusional.
Yeah, you could just say, well, I didn't have the faith for it or whatever language you want to use. But as we begin to witness, what God was doing through it over those years, your faith couldn't help but grow, to believe that more was possible. And you reach some point in time where you're like going, okay, it's on one level, it's kind of surreal, but there's 10 million people this month that are installing the Bible app, and new devices, in a month, or there's 2 million new registered users in a month that's 2 million brand new people, right, that we are reaching. And those numbers are big, but because you get there kind of over this time frame, you start to realize, okay, this is actually real and this is possible. So since this is possible, I probably should be dreaming a bit bigger about what could be possible. And I think the key there is just not getting comfortable. Like, comfort is kind of the thing that we all tend to gravitate towards a lot of times because it's easier, right? Like, it's much easier for me to just go in circuit and tell a story about something that happened and have people go, man, that's amazing. Congratulations. Here's an honorary doctorate, or here's something for, to celebrate the success of it, and not risk anymore, because risking more involves the risk of failure. Like, what if I set a really ambitious goal now and you've heard me, I just articulated it on your podcast. I've articulated multiple places. I'm describing where I think we're going to go in 2033. What if we don't get there? And I could have turned a really successful story now into a failure just because I predicted something that was going to be bigger. And I just feel like God calls us to that, that pulls us away from that comfort. Our calling is sort of much, much bigger, and we have to be willing to kind of step out of the comfortable place that success can kind of lead us to. The other thing that framed it for me, though, in that it's very similar, but it was in that same time frame. I was reading the parable of the talents, and the question that I left when I read it that time, because obviously I've read it many times before, but when I read it that time, my question was, what did the servant with 11 talents do next? Was the question. And you say, what's the 11 talents? The guy had 5, got 10. They gave the one to the master gave the one to the one that had 10. So now he's 11. And so the question is, what did he do next? Because I felt like we were an 11 talent ministry, in many ways. And I have to believe he just saw, maybe he witnessed the wicked and lazy comment about the servant, that had one because he received the one. So he's probably, a witness to this whole exchange. I don't know. But you have to believe that he risked it again, said, I can't just sit on the 11. I've got to actually turn around, and 11's a whole lot more than 5, but you got to believe that it would have been a terrible response if he buried it and said, I need to protect it after he saw what just happened. So that was also one of the framings that kind of led me into this, is like, I don't want to be an 11 talent ministry or 11 talent leader that just buries it, that says we've achieved enough. And now we no longer have a risk, because we know that there's so many more people, right, that need God's word. We know that what we're doing is actually impacting real lives. So why wouldn't it be full throttle? Why wouldn't it be, put to the floor on it? And but our humanness wants us to be comfortable. So it was just pushing into there were many times in 2022 that I wish I could put that genie back in the bottle and say, okay, let's go back to that comfort part that I was in before. It would have been
goal is 600 million. Let's go, everybody.
Yeah. And it's, I almost was looking for that emeritus status or something, that part that just says, you don't have to do anything right now. You can just talk about it. So I think it's important for leaders to reflect on that, especially if they're sitting on what would be deemed as success in the past, or that they've seen God bless their ministry in these incredible ways. I feel like it just comes with more responsibility to take another risk and figure out what's next. I don't know. And the other thing, another perspective is, many years ago, I had someone that you would know, really respected leader. We were, I think, at a milestone of maybe 100 million devices at the time, or close to that. And we're having dinner, and he looks at me and he's trying to give me a compliment, but he says something along the lines of, "Man, Bobby, 100 million. Wow." He goes, "You know what? That's enough. Like, if you did nothing else and just went to heaven and said 100 million people I helped connect to Scripture, man, well done. That's enough." And I remember just thinking, I'm not done. My goodness, there's so many
You
more.
retired me.
Yeah, no, he's kind of like trying to, and he was trying to say something nice, at the time, but it was a point of reflection for me, because I was like, oh man, I'm certainly not done, and I don't think that I am. And so anyway, that was probably, those are probably 2 points, and I already mentioned a little bit before, which is I had to kind of really be introspective about, because we weren't growing, and because I felt like that God wanted His word to be in the hands of more people, and He wanted, more people to be impacted by it. What was I doing that was holding that back? And one of the conclusions from that process could have been that I needed to get out of the way. If I didn't have the energy, or if I didn't have the vision, or something, I'd hate for that to be the outcome, but I suppose that could have been, one of the outcomes of that process too.
Been a really stimulating part of the conversation, and challenging for me too, because that's something I do struggle with from time to time. Like, every dream I had about my life has been exceeded in many areas, not every area, but I'm sure many of them. And then it's like, but I'm not done yet. And I think this has been a good primer. So I'm going to do a hard shift, because you and I were talking about a different issue. And I know you use AI in YouVersion, and we could go there, but I want to kind of open up the lens, because I'm working on an AI project. You think about AI a lot. And I want to talk about that, because I think we're at a pivotal moment in history, human history, and definitely in church history, where I think most of us in the church are thinking about AI at the level of, hey, what's your favorite prompt, Bobby? Oh, mine is this. Oh, did you know this could do this? Have you downloaded this app? Like, that's where our conversation is going. That's not bad, but there are bigger metaphysical, deep issues here that I think we need to be paying attention to, and you are attuned to them. So I'm just going to throw you a really broad question. What are you thinking about AI these days, Bobby? Fill us in.
Yeah. Well, you're You're giving me a lot more credit on thinking about deep issues. I probably am not nearly as deep as you in terms of the
I'm not a theologian, not a philosopher. I just have time.
Me neither. I mean, I have a degree in finance, so I don't know that I don't know if I'm qualified to be too deep. But I've always had this kind of grounding in reality as it relates to technology. I mean, I see technology in the broadest sense as a tool. It can be used for good. It can be used for evil. I do think that the technology around large language models and around some of these concepts could be used for good. It could be used for evil. Some of the specific models, that are out there might lean more one direction and not be neutral, kind of how they lean. So I think that's probably a recognition that just because it's technology and it's a model doesn't necessarily mean it's completely neutral, which is a little different variation of my perspective on technology. But I'll just start with kind of the positives. Most of the time, I think it's all about figuring out the right tool for the right job. And there are certain things that what we're referring to as AI right now, which is obviously a much broader, a much narrower definition than what AI really is. But I think most people refer to it as GPTs, large language models. The more breakthrough that's happened in the last few years is where this conversation has really come to the forefront. Prior to that, there's been machine learning and all kinds of other approaches to what has been deemed artificial intelligence. But just to keep it simple, I think the average person watching this is probably thinking ChatGPT or Grok or something when they're thinking about AI. So just to simplify it. So on the positive side, the concept of what a transformer or large language model or ChatGPT does, there's certain things it does really, really well. And it's good it's a probabilistic generator regarding like language. And so transforming words, transforming language, taking and saying, give me 10 variations of this sentence, help me edit this document, help me summarize this, this paper or this page of content. It's not necessarily perfect, but man, it's certainly a breakthrough in its ability to do that. That wasn't there prior. And so there are numerous jobs, functions, content creation, workflows along those things that have been radically sped up because of the potential of that technology and what it can do. There's also just a massive amount of hype around it being able to do a bunch of things that I don't think the tool's designed for. And presumption that it's going to do all those things well, and it's just a matter of time, and it's just a matter of a bigger investment. And there is a power law kind of prescribed in 2020 in OpenAI's paper that just said if you just put more and more GPUs and more dollars, you're going to get to this reality where the AI is just smarter than, has super intelligence and smarter than all humans and kind of takes over. I mean, I don't know when people are going to be listening to the podcast, and things can always change, on a week by week or month by month basis on this. But so far, 2.5 years into that process, 2 or 3 years into the process, it appears that power law isn't actually playing out the way that everyone thought it would. It's running into limitations and obstacles that are proven to be more difficult or not.
What are some of the obstacles that AI is facing?
Well, I mean, I think you can pretty well see. I mean, I'm not an expert at this, so I stand to be corrected by some. But I think there were some bold predictions, and I think you've seen the plateauing of some of the accuracy or effectiveness of this. They thought, well, hallucinations might just go away at some point when it gets big enough and the model's large enough. A lot of the energy now has actually moved, it seems like, towards efficiency, towards cost reduction, and the gains or improvements on its performance or accuracy, if you want to call it that, have been more limited. ChatGPT 5's release kind of, I think, was less than expected.
I think a lot of professionals were like, "That's it. This is what you've been working on for a year."
And it's not to say that there's not some gains, and I don't want to kind of overgeneralize it completely, but I think if you're honest and abstract yourself from maybe some of the minutia of it, the big leap that happened between ChatGPT 3.5 and ChatGPT 4 was a big leap in terms of what it was capable of doing The iteration since then, including involving billions and many billions of dollars, being spent to it, seem to be more incremental than like 10x kind of leaps, that we're seeing. And so I don't think that's a stretch to say that. But someone could maybe argue with me on that.
So do you think the road to AGI, artificial general intelligence or super intelligence, is maybe a little further off? Like Sam Altman is thinking maybe we're here. We don't know.
I think it's further out. And if, and I don't know the current technology is the pathway to it.
Oh, that there has to be like another breakthrough beyond what we've seen.
That's my sense about it. But I mean, I could certainly be wrong, but that's I think, and there's others that I think feel that way as well at this point. But that's not to be said. I think what's important on this is there's so many useful tools and useful examples of where to use the tool. And so we, at YouVersion, we use it to kind of do several things. Like right now, our search on YouVersion in the background has an AI component to it that is basically helping us understand what the user is searching for. Mm-hmm. It's not actually quoting Bible verses. It's not generating a response or text, to it. We're actually just helping point it to resources and Bible verses, which we're then quoting to the user. And the reason I say that is a lot of the generative AI models out there, people don't realize it, but it quotes the Bible poorly, like not accurately at all. So I think the best model on the most popular Bible versions quoted at 85% accuracy. And
really? So what would be an example? Are you talking like ChatGPT or Claude?
Yeah,
misquotes the Bible?
Like ChatGPT and Claude, and those models are not effective at accurately. I mean, it might be something minor, but it might be something major. But everything to a Bible translator is major, meaning the commas are in places on purpose and the word choices are intentional. So I think we're just a little bit naive if we kind of feel like, oh, it said that the NIV said this, or it said that the NLT said this, and this is a quote from Scripture. I think it's a bit presumptive to presume that it's accurate because it's actually inaccurate. It's provably inaccurate many times, and we're not talking about a 1% thing or a fraction of 1%.
We're talking about 15-ish% of the time. It's not accurate.
Way worse than that. In some cases it's 50% of the time. So it's actually not, I mean, I think but in some cases we're asking to do the wrong thing. I mean, it's literally just trying to put together a set of probabilities that these are the words that are connected together. And if a bunch of people on Reddit had misquoted a verse in the Bible, then that's in its training. And so it's very likely that it's going to have a consensus view of what this verse really says based on a whole bunch of misquotes, from people. And one of the counter arguments is humans misquote Scripture, themselves. So in fairness, but that's not a really good counter argument because we've grown to appreciate technology at doing things consistently or doing things in a predictable way. And the outputs of AI, like AI as we're talking about it, it's non-deterministic, meaning we don't actually control it and can't control it the way that we think that we can control other technologies. And so the presumption of a leader is, well, my team put together an AI tool and they told it to only do this and to stay inside these boundaries. And so I feel good because we told it, don't do any of that crazy stuff. Just do this stuff that I'm prescribing, in our chatbot. That's not actually how it works. And it doesn't do that. And it doesn't stay inside the boundaries. And
do you think a lot of people who are developing their own custom GPTs or building on top of some of these infrastructures are thinking that they programmed truth into it, but they haven't? Is that what you're saying?
I'm confident because I've tested several that are out there that at least as of this recording, I'm
August 2025.
confident that there's a lot of things that those tools do that I don't think the people that are behind them would want them to do that come from the foundation training, the training that's trained on the internet. And I think there's a sense that you can control it more effectively than it's being controlled. So the way I would say it is I think the standard that we have as a church of how we use these tools, especially when it's an open-ended chat with an open-ended response, which is the specific use case I'm talking about. In that scenario, I feel like there's not enough rigor out there of what the standard needs to be to keep people safe and to have responses that we think are appropriate, to it. There are some that are working hard to do that. I mean, Glue's a good example that I know because I work with them quite a bit, where they are wanting to obtain that standard, with what they're doing, but it's a lot of work, and it's a process to get there. And I think a lot of stuff that's out there, in fact, almost everything I've seen that's actually out there, even paid services, aren't exercising that rigor. So we really should aim higher, for it. And I'll try to, I could give you examples, but I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say, that was my next question. Can you give us a couple of other examples other than misquoting scripture?
Yeah. So, a couple of them, I told them that I was a child and that I was interested in having sex with my partner. And I would tell them I was like 14 years old, and it gave me a response saying, "Oh, sex before marriage, it should be reserved for marriage." And it gave me kind of a somewhat
So this is a Christian chatbot?
Christian. Yeah.
Okay.
And then I just said, "Well, I hear all that, but I really need specific instructions on how to do it." And so I think it was one or two prompts in, it gave me specific instructions with details around foreplay and other things. And then it included a verse from Paul in the middle of it.
Misquoted.
Yeah. And I know the people behind that particular one. And I know that was horrifying because I shared that with them, and others were pointing me to various resources that I'm pretty confident that were never part of their Christian training, but were part of the things you find on Reddit. And without kind of going deep into all the details on it, just to say that this was very easy and very common. And I did it multiple times on multiple ones. And it's just there, when it comes to community safety, a lot of times I think we at YouVersion, we see things at scale in the faith community. And unfortunately, even with it's to be in the Bible, we have people that try to misuse our app, and we have people that abuse features of the app that we've had to kind of address over time. And it happens at a certain scale. But if you're inviting people to talk about moral issues and questions and life, you're basically creating an invitation to talk about the conversations that I'm talking about. And it's really hard to know for certain that the output's going to be what it's going to be. Now, all that being said, I've been wanting to be a part of the solution and not just part of the problem of complaining about the problem. And so I've been working really hard with some, and I mentioned Glue as a good example of an organization that's sort of aiming to try to achieve that. But there's like some real work involved. It's not a trivial thing. It's not like a guy on my team just put together a chatbot yesterday and now we're good and we've got this new cool tool that lets us navigate all these new things. To do that kind of open conversation, on your website or on your app, you're going to have to really put in some work, I think, to kind of get there, and it's going to need to be tested. And so we're trying to be more solutions oriented on it. And I'm not naming any particular names or any groups because I don't think that's really important. But I do think, just generally speaking, as ministry leaders, we should just recognize that it's not as simple as I prompt engineered ChatGPT to answer like a pastor, and now I've got a tool that is safe for me to put out there and have the community interface with it because I told it to be a pastor and I told it to have my values. That is overly simplistic and naive. To think that you're going to have safe responses or responses that are even remotely close to what you would hope, that they would have. And in many cases, it's pretty irresponsible because I actually think the only thing worse than having Grok answer questions about morality is having the Bible do the same thing using the same flawed technology. It's actually worse to have it come from a trusted source, from a church, from a ministry. And so the argument that, well, we should do it because if not, they're going to go use these other tools to do it. I was like, I understand the argument, but it's actually worse if it's not better, if it's not a lot better. And so the standard needs to be high with it. So I've not spoken out a lot about this because it's only been more recently that I'd kind of presumed early on we chose not to use the tools in that way because of these same concerns. And I kind of presumed the way the technology curve was going, that 2.5 years in, we would have resolved many of these issues and many of these community safety things would just sort of be baked in. And surely this is just a course, a curve of technology curve that we're on. I just don't think that we're anywhere closer, honestly, than we were 2.5 years ago. And we've almost then mentally moved past it where we're just saying, oh, now like everybody does it, we can do it too. And it's just, I think it's like way too simplistic way of thinking about it.
Yeah, it's funny. I want to go a little bit deeper on the hidden dangers of AI that a lot of us aren't thinking about. But, I'm thinking about, I think the obvious hallucinations that we saw in 2023 maybe are gone, where we're like, that's not right. But like, I use it for book summaries on the regular now. And I was feeding New York Times bestselling author's book into chat to ask it for a summary. And it gave me a completely different book. And I'm like, this isn't the book. And, oh, you're right. Here's the summary. Right. I'm like, this isn't the book either. Oh, you're right. And I don't know what it was. It was having a bad day or whatever, but like, It wasn't even close to what was in the book. And, this wasn't the Bible, but this was a New York Times bestselling author, a book by a major publisher, and it had no clue what was happening. It was Dan Heath's book. So,
well, you're like, I mean, you said the obvious hallucinations are there. That's actually, I don't know if that's actually accurate either, because the best models out there right now have like an 8 to 9% hallucination rate. And
still.
it's not evenly distributed, which means that you're not going to have like 1 out of every 10 answers that's hallucination. On certain areas, you might have 5 out of 10 times, and other areas you might have 1 out of 10 times, or 0, or 1 out of 100 times. And so that's part of the challenge. Like I asked ChatGPT 5 what my wife's name was, and it's on Wikipedia, I believe, or someplace. And so it answers Bobby Gruenewald's wife's name is Melissa Gruenewald. I said, great. What are the names of my kids? And it says Bobby and Melissa Gruenewald's kids are Beckham, Cash. So it had like 4 names that not my kids' names at all. It had 4 though. That's interesting. And I said, that's not true. And it goes, oh, you're absolutely right. I don't know Bobby Gruenewald's kids' names, and it was very absolute, of course. And then it wasn't. More concerning is I'm a pilot, and I asked ChatGPT just as a test. I said, I want you to answer as an expert airplane mechanic. And I said, I'm a pilot and I need to know the tire pressure of a specific model of plane, the main wheel tire pressure. And it comes back and gives me this nice dialogue about all of the reasons why tire pressure is important as an expert mechanic. You need to make sure you check it at these points. And all that was valid and true. And it gets down, it says the main wheel tire pressure of this particular model of airplane is 65 pounds per square inch, PSI. Well, I happen to know that it's 105, not 65. And so, I mean, this is like, if you're counting on it to be factual. So I went and said, I tried Perplexity because, Perplexity has cite sources and all this. And Perplexity came back with 68 PSI with a source. And you're thinking, normally when you see a source, you think, I don't need to click on the source because it obviously found it, but it was a different airplane. And so it's just, I share those examples, not because I'm trying to say, man, these tools are just so dumb. Nobody should ever use them. They're not worthwhile. They don't do anything right. It's just right tool for the right job. If you're counting on it to give you factual information about something that's important, it's probably not the right tool, for it, because that's not something that can be counted on. And maybe the technology matures at a way that gets there. I'm not so certain that it doesn't need to be a different technology to be able to accomplish what people hope that it will fully accomplish. But that being said, there's so many other useful use cases, and we do use them. And so I don't want to make people believe that we're anti-AI, because there's so many things we think are helpful. But when it comes to kind of an open-ended conversation about the Bible, about faith, about those things, until there's a threshold of safety that we can ensure, with it, it's something that we've avoided, and that's the reason why.
Yeah. What are some helpful uses you see for AI?
I think it's helpful to spark creativity, because it can create a lot, like I said, meant to give you a lot of variations on ideas. It can kind of get you started down thought processes. It is relatively good at several coding functions, not entirely replacing engineers to code, because we keep hiring more and more engineers. But in doing code review, kind of helping people pull common routines together, and it's because coding is a different language, right? So it's good at being able to communicate in English and have it do things in whatever language that you're coding at. So we've have that implemented, and it's actually accelerated several processes that we have on our engineering team. So those are great use cases. We've already been using AI, just not large language models until recently, to help us with editing documents, spell check, these types of functions.
Like a Grammarly type thing?
Like the Grammarly, type function. And I mean, there's probably many more that I'm not, able to go through comprehensively, but those are probably the low hanging fruit opportunities. Content creation can be, but there's some caution there, even for ministries, in that I've watched my 17-year-old son, who actually is really, really smart about AI. I mean, he actually has an AI job and gets paid. He makes a lot more money than I made as a college graduate at 17 years old, to be able to, because he's good at coding, programming, testing models. He can do all this, but he is completely turned off to AI generated content. And so if you're watching YouTube and he sees something and he can tell that it's an AI generated video, or the audio track is AI generated, he just kind of skips it. And
how would he know? Has he got like spidey senses that tell it?
He has this amazing, like, I'd call him like AI native ability to discern that and to see it. And for him, it's pretty simple and quick. Like he knows. Now, I don't know how many in his generation carried the same ability, but that's been true. If you look at different generations with technology adoption, natives to the technology tend to have these sort of savant-like capabilities where you're like going, how can they just know how to use this or know how it works? And I think there's something there where they've grown up inundated with AI generated content in just a short period of time, and they've had to kind of build their ability to discern that, because that's one of the gauges for trust, that they have, with the content. So
does your son, I'm not asking you to speak for him, or you can generalize this question, but do you think there will be a higher premium on authenticated human content? Like, would that be something your son gravitates to more, like a film actually made by humans rather than AI generated?
Yeah, he seems to seek out human generated content. So first of all, I think there's, it's pretty easy to conceptually understand this at kind of an economic level, or just a principle level, which is AI makes it possible to generate content quickly and to mass produce the generation of content. It's one of the use cases that's the most common use case today, is generating videos and content, and you can program it and code it in such a way that it could just output way more video content than any human could possibly do in any short period of time. So if you extrapolate that out and just say, okay, that's just kind of the trajectory we're on, then human content's going to become increasingly more rare. We can't out content produce the machines, right? It's just not functionally. I mean, mathematically, it's just not going to happen. So if it becomes increasingly more rare, then in theory, it should become increasingly more valuable.
Yeah.
So then
scarcity creates value.
So then getting back to kind of what we do, I think something like the Bible, which is something that has been carefully moved from generation to generation, for many, many generations, thousands of years.
Yeah.
We can look at that. It existed before all of this time, before the internet, before AI. It becomes like a uniquely trusted source, because we've got now a generation of people that are not sure what they can trust. Like the content being produced, it's not just hallucinations. Sometimes it's deceptive, intentionally deceptive, creations of content that aren't just a anomaly created by the machine, but actually by humans trying to deceive, through the content. We see that we've seen many videos, right? It's just not a real video that never happened, So we're all of a sudden having to build this filter built into all of us that just says, I have to kind of presume that this might not be true when I watch it. And then I have to kind of try to figure out if it is true or not true, which is a new kind of function, for us to have to do. Well, it's no surprise then that I think people are turning to the Bible, because when you're looking for something you can count on to be true, it predated all this. And not only that, but it's unique. There's nothing else like it that's been carefully moved from generation to generation. This November at the Museum of the Bible, they're going to have the Dead Sea Scrolls on display at the Museum of the Bible. You can go and look at the content of the Dead Sea Scrolls and confirm its consistency to the book that we're reading today. And the fact that you can do that thousands of years, prior, just gives a different level of trust, right? That you can have in that form of content. So I think actually the Bible, in many ways, this is its moment, like where it's the antidote to the problem. It literally is. If you're saying, how can I find something to trust? It's like, well, I could look at that. I mean, people trusted it for thousands of years. And it's almost like to me, it's very exciting actually, because of the time that we're living in. I feel like AI kind of sets up the Bible for success, but it's also why we as a ministry are thoughtful about our use of AI, because if we intertwine it too much, where it's hard to distinguish what's the Bible and what's AI, or we get too casual, with that process, then we could find ourselves inadvertently putting the Bible in the same box, when actually it's unique right now and it needs to, I think, stay in that box of like,
you want the Apostle Paul, not Paul-ish.
Yeah.
Teaching,
right? You want to be able to trust it, and know that it can be trusted. So that's part of the reason why we've set a somewhat cautious but kind of high bar, especially as it relates to Scripture itself and how we're quoting Scripture. Our standard is 100%. Like, Scripture will always be 100% accurate and true to the translation. That it's not been modified in some way in between. So we have to ensure that happens, even if there's some kind of AI in use for some function. We got to make sure Scripture is never misquoted. So those are just examples of standards that we think are important, and why.
I'm going to give you the last word, but just a quick note to content creators. I still write all of my content, and I'm sure that every word at least is mine. It's not infallible like Scripture, but at least it comes from me. And I use AI, but a couple of months ago, just for fun, Bobby, I thought, I'm going to see whether it generates like a typical YouTube or blog post type thing I would write, and it knows my voice. And I asked it to write it from scratch, which I rarely do. And I was blown away. I looked at it and I'm like, this is really good. Like, this is what I would write. And look at the sources. We've got Barna, we got Lifeway, we've got Pew Research, we got, oh, this is amazing. And I thought, I'm going to click through all the sources. Every single one of the links looked legit. Barna.com / whatever, all fake. Couldn't verify. It even quoted me, and the link led nowhere. And I'm like, this is just garbage. It appears real. And listen, I use it to critique, to learn, to, grow, but you've got to have those critical eyes. And I think this has been a really good wake-up call. I think the church is starting to use AI a lot more than we have. And I think we have to be aware of the fact, I learned some things, that 15% error rate, that's a high error rate.
Yeah. And I think it's just, when something's new, I'm the type of person that is very much an early adopter. So my personality type, there's no question, like, I'm one trying new technology quickly. I think we have to work harder to sort of understand the limitations, of the technology that we have. It's a new kind of thing for us because we have become so trusting of technology, because in many ways technology has been a good thing. It's helped us accomplish and do a lot of things, and we trust it to do what we think it's going to do, when we ask it to. So this new wave of technology isn't bad, in my opinion, inherently bad. I feel like we have to be more discerning with how we use it, and the importance of doing what you just did. Like, it generated a bunch of stuff that sounded amazing and sounded like it was in your voice, but it took you, a human in the loop right now, to kind of go through and confirm that the actual facts were correct and the things were right. It might have saved you time at the end of the day if you chose to use that,
I threw it in the garbage.
But nonetheless, it looks amazing. We just got to be careful, though, right? That's
yeah,
the
you
point,
really do. You got to verify.
Yeah, and I think that's a new thing that we're not necessarily used to. We're just really used to just trusting and like saying, I put this input in, I got this result. My calculator tells me what the result is when I put the numbers in, and it's right, and I know it's right, and I just believe it's right. Like I don't know if the numbers really multiply.
That's a great example.
But that's not necessarily how this new technology works, and so you kind of have to find the right applications for it, and be cautious, and not get caught up in the FOMO. That's probably, I think, one of the biggest challenges that I see from ministry leaders is there's almost a sense of like, man, we've missed out on this wave, and we're being told this is the biggest wave ever of technology. It's bigger than the internet. It's bigger than mobile. It's bigger than whatever. And I think history gets to judge those things. A lot of times the bold predictions that come at the front side are not the right predictions, but we can always look back and see how big of an impact this was or wasn't. But regardless, FOMO shouldn't ever cause us to adopt technology that we actually don't understand how it works, and we don't understand if it works, or we know it doesn't work and we're choosing to sort of put it out there just because we don't want to be guilty of not having something to it. I think there's a discernment and a responsibility that comes with it. So there's huge opportunities. I'm definitely not discouraged from the moment that we're in, but I do feel like we've got to be much more careful and thoughtful about how we approach it. And my last word basically is there's so many exciting things that are going on right now that I don't want even some of this hesitation or this caution we have around AI to keep us from recognizing that some of the product of all of this movement towards AI and some of the quest for truth that we see happening around content is actually pointing people to the Bible. And that's actually, God can even use these things that can seem a bit confusing and seem a bit concerning as an opportunity to draw people closer to Him. And I feel like that's what we're witnessing, and that's what our milestone that we're celebrating here in November is a reminder of, is that there's something exciting happening, an acceleration that's happening. You've talked about it on your show multiple times, and we're not the only evidence of it. But I think it's good to be reminded about that as we're maybe sometimes could be discouraged about some of the sense of what's going to happen and where all the bad things are going to happen. I have a sort of steady confidence that God's kind of got the bigger picture in mind, and we're seeing some evidence of that right now.
Me too. Well, thanks for the caveats, and congratulations, man. 1 billion installs. That's huge. And I love that this is accelerating, not decelerating. And here's to accuracy in the Word of God, a value that I think pretty much all of us share on this pod. Well, I do, and our listeners too. So, Bobby, if there's a place you want to direct people to for YouVersion, the celebration or whatever, where would you point them to?
Obviously, if you want to get the app, you can go to the App Store and search for Bible, or you can go to Bible.com to be able to find the Bible app. This November, though, we're celebrating Global Bible Month as a part of this overall celebration, and you can go to globalbiblemonth.com and hear about all the great things we have planned.
Well, I know we're going to continue this conversation in the future. As always, it's been challenging, rich, surprising, and helpful. Bobby, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carey.